Hi there, and welcome to another of the screencast by DTA, and we're looking at acquiring movement skills again. Today we'll be looking at memory and multi-store memory processes. So let's get started. So initially what we're talking about is the importance of the role that the memory plays in information processing. One of the things it can do is actually interpret the information that we receive from our senses and then compare it against memories that we've already got. And if we haven't got these memories, then we're going to struggle to make decisions based on the information that we're receiving from our senses. So this involves the DCR process, or the detection, comparative and recognition process that goes on within the memory. So let's have a look at that in conjunction with the Whiting's and Welford's models, and this one's obviously Whiting's. So here what we're talking about is the perceptual mechanism that starts off straight away. Here we detect the senses that we're receiving, and then we check to see in our long-term memory whether we've actually seen this type of sense before. So let's put it into a sporting context. Let's say you've got this player running at you, so there's the clear stimulus. You then check into your long-term memory to see whether you've had this sort of stimulus before through your senses, and then you compare it against one that you've got before, and then hopefully you'll recognise one that you've got, and then you would after that be able to move into the next process of the information processing model to work out what you're actually going to do. So in essence, memory is a really key part of how we process information, and that's why we're going to look at memory right now. So what we have here is the 3 stages of the model, and we're going to start with the sensory input, which is here. So as it states quite obviously, this is, as we've looked at in the information processing model, is the senses that we're receiving in, and we keep these in our sensory register to start with, or the sensory store. And this store in essence is what happens immediately. Everything that takes place is filtered, and we call this filtering selective attention. We've also covered this in information processing, but it's about you as an athlete focusing on the particular cues that are important for you to achieve your desired outcome. So let's say, for example, we've got a footballer and they put the ball down on the penalty spot. They need to selectively attend to the ball, how far away the keeper is, or where the keeper is in relation to the goal. And the things that they need to try and block out are maybe the crowd, or the other players that may be goading them, or the atmosphere, or the pressure, or the situation. So by selectively attending to the correct cues, you've got a greater likelihood of being successful. This is also known as the recognition part of the DCR process. So relevant information is then moved from the short-term sensory store into the short-term memory. So in this section here, if the information that we've taken from the sensory stores is then rehearsed or practiced, we're able to actually solidify the information and retain it. However, if it's not practiced, what will happen is it's forgotten. And there are different methods of maintaining information in the short-term memory, what we'll look at a little bit later. And there is a limited capacity to this section, and it's argued that you can only actually retain about 5 to 9 pieces of information in this store here. So for information to move from here into the long-term memory, we've got to rehearse it and we have to practice it. Then the information will be passed through and coded into our long-term memory. Once we're into the long-term memory, we're now looking at the recognition part of the DCR process. We're recognizing potential stimulus that we've had before to the one that we're potentially having at the moment. So for example, a ball coming over the net at a particular height, at a particular speed, we can look in our long-term memory and see what that looked like before, and then from there we can actually work out what we're going to do. So in these situations here, you could say that the footballer is selectively attending to the ball. The information that they're trying to remove is potentially the players, and because they've been in this situation before, they will be looking into their short-term memory saying, yes, we've done this, so it's a relatively strong cue, they've rehearsed and practiced it, and therefore the information has moved into the long-term memory, and then they can make a decision as to what they're going to do. Same principle, just a different example there with the ball coming over the net as mentioned before. So we're going to look at each one of these in slightly more detail. So here we've got our short-term sensory store, and in this situation the characteristics of the short-term sensory are that it lasts for a very brief amount of time, about 0.25 to 1 second. Other issues are that for each one of your senses you have a separate store, and as mentioned before, it disregards irrelevant information, and therefore it has a large capacity, but what it does allow us to do is selectively attend, and that's one of the key terms here, selectively attend to the correct information, and this is and takes part in the perceptual mechanism. So our short-term memory store here, as I mentioned, is the workplace, and we're focusing on this part here. With this, characteristics are its limited capacity to 5 to 9 bits of information as a rule, and the information is compared to what we've actually learned before. You can actually increase the amount of information you can retain by chunking and rehearsing, and it's very important to do that if you're trying to move information from your short-term memory store into your long-term memory. And then finally, quite importantly, the appropriate information is coded, then passed to your long-term memory. So how many of those can you retain? Give you about another 3 seconds, 2, 1, gone. Alright, so how many of those do you think you could actually retain? As we mentioned here, your short-term memory store has a limited capacity of about 5 to 9 items. How many do you think you got? Okay, let's have a look. So more than likely you'd have held of ones that are of slightly more interest, maybe the dog or a sporting one there. Ones that you maybe have missed out would be the letters. So the more interesting something is, then the more likely it is to be retained into your short-term memory, and then hopefully into your long. So the important things to note here, especially for sports, is rehearsal and chunking. So if you rehearse any type of activity, say for example dribbling or shooting, the stronger the cue is, and therefore the more likely it is to be retained into your long-term memory. And that is the essential part, because it aids our ability to recall and recognise that information when we come up with the same stimulus again and again. And then finally, in our long-term memory, we have an unlimited capacity. This can retain information, but only information that's actually been rehearsed. But key to us as sports people and athletes is this is where our motor programs are stored, and this is the retrieval element and also the recognition part of the DCR process. So this is where we go to look to see whether we've actually experienced this situation before. And that in essence is the 3 stages to the memory model.